Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. For the next few videos I'm going to be revisiting certain aspects of Upfront, and first of all I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of you who've left comments recently and suggestions. I've had a few questions come in both on the channel as well as off the channel, private communications and the like. And there's been a fair few of you who've wanted to know about aspects of this game which I've not touched on before, and that's really great. Thank you for those. I've been thinking about the format, and rather than doing an immensely long playthrough that you'd have to sit through and that I would have to hope would generate the circumstances you were talking about, I'm going to change tack slightly and I'm going to set up situations that allow me to explain the particular rules that you want to know more about. So I'm looking at maybe making, let's say, 3 or 4 short videos in this sequence, working through the questions I've received recently. And I hope that these will be in some use in clarifying these, how they work, and so forth. So today I'm going to return to the bedrock of Upfront, which is an element of the infantry interaction. And I've had quite a few people ask me about infiltration, about how it works mainly, because the rules are a little bit daunting when it comes to infiltration. Not that they're complex in terms of the basic idea, but they're multi-step and they're a bit more involved than the movement and shooting rules, which I've demonstrated in the previous videos. So I'll get into infiltration in this video and also talk about the pros and cons as I see them and why they're important. So in a nutshell, the purpose of infiltration is to allow individual soldiers, as the name suggests, to get in among an enemy position to seek benefits which are twofold. One is that a soldier who infiltrates an enemy position is able to significantly increase his firepower. He doubles it, basically. The other option that an infiltrator is given is that he can enter close combat with someone on the enemy side. So both those elements have a function in the game, quite a key one. But it's not very often used. And I think part of the reason for that is, as in real life, infiltrating an enemy position carries a great deal of risk. And between that and the fact that infiltration is a little bit more rules heavy than other bits of Upfront, I can see why a lot of players, I'm certainly one of them, I hold my hands up there, are quite reluctant to employ it as a tactic, because really often in this game you can win the battle by attaining fire superiority and simply driving off or incapacitating your enemy that way. And to be perfectly honest, again, as in real life, entering close combat is all very well, but getting close enough and then doing it is generally better when your opponent is pinned or suppressed, rather than when they're active and able to shoot back at you if things go wrong. But anyway, that's a matter of personal taste. So, infiltration, how does it work? Infiltration is carried out as the sole action by a group, but it can involve any number of men in the group, either 1 or 2, or the entire group can attempt it. To attempt infiltration, you first have to be at relative range 5. So I've set up a hypothetical Soviet and German group here at relative range 5. And we're going to see how they progress. Now, the first thing you have to do is see whether your soldier is able to infiltrate. And there's 2 ways a player can do this. The first is to declare a soldier's attempting infiltration and to play a movement card solely on them. This is one of those rare occasions where you can play multiple cards for a single group action. So let's say that the Russian player wanted a sure thing, so he orders Sergeant Rostov and Private Yastrebov to infiltrate the German position. And to ensure they succeed, he plays the 2 movement cards, which go into the discard pile, and the 2 soldiers can then attempt infiltration. Now, if you don't have a movement card, or you don't have enough movement cards for all the soldiers who want to try and infiltrate, they have to pass a morale check. So let's say the Russian wanted to order 3 soldiers to infiltrate. He has cards for the first 2. They'll make their attempt in a moment. But Private Storchillo there has to take a morale check, fairly a standard morale check. And he draws a 1, which is within his morale, so he's okay. And he can proceed with the morale check. I mean, with the infiltration attempt, rather. So he goes off and does that with the other 2. So how to see whether your infiltration attempt was successful? Basically, what you do is you draw a random position check for the number of men in the position you're trying to infiltrate. If the number you get is a red one, you have successfully infiltrated. If it's black, you have not been successful. But it's not simply a matter of drawing. There are a ton of modifiers which switch your position number to the left and to the right, depending on whether they're favorable or not. And there are around a dozen modifiers. I'm afraid I'll say that again. There are around a dozen modifiers. They are all listed in the rule book, but believe you me, you need a much better memory than I've got to remember them all. What I found very handy is to print out one of the cheat sheets available on Board Game Geek. Now you can either do something like this or you can do your own version. I'm very sorry, my camera's not being in a very helpful mood again. But essentially, I've got them listed in that little box there. And the easiest thing to do is to just work down them in sequence. So let's do Sergeant Rostov, and I'll call them out as I do them. So he unfortunately has drawn a black random position check. Now, pinned men do not count. That's a very useful thing to remember. So it's not that you ignore them when you do the random position check, but one of the modifiers is that for every pinned man, the result is shifted 1 to the left. Unfortunately for him, none of the Germans are pinned, so that doesn't happen. A night scenario would shift it 3 columns to the left, but unfortunately for him, this is a daytime one, so it's still on 4. No smoke cards have been played, so it stays where it is. He's not infiltrating from brush or from woods or from hill. In fact, the suicidally brave man is trying to infiltrate from open ground. Now, in fact, open ground does have a column shift, but it's 2 to the right. No one has played movement cards, so that doesn't interfere. Normally it would be a column shift to the right again. He can, if he wishes, play a concealed card to help him, and for each level of concealment it's shifted 2 to the left. So he's back where he started on 4. His group has not been infiltrated. That would be a shift in that direction. He's not Japanese, so he doesn't benefit from a natural proclivity for stealth, and it's not a jungle scenario. So after all those modifiers have been gone through, he's still on a black random number check. So his infiltration attempt unfortunately has failed, but he suffers no further negative consequences. It just means that for all his squirming and slipping and sliding and ducking and diving, he hasn't quite made it. Now, had he, or indeed if any of the others, had successfully landed on a red random position check number, that would have been great. They would then have been rewarded with their infiltrator status, meaning that although they're still effectively part of their group, they're also embedded in the German group. So they've basically crawled all the way up to the opposition unnoticed and are now in a very advantageous position. Now, the benefit of infiltrating is not just that you have the doubled firepower option or the ability to enter close combat if you wish. It's also a great way of stopping an enemy group from achieving a scenario's victory conditions, because in many, many cases, A scenario's victory condition will specify something like you have to have at least 4 men unpinned, uninfiltrated in a group at whatever relative range it is. So infiltrating an enemy group is a great way of unhinging those victory conditions and stopping them. It also means that you are in a great position if you want to lever them out of a position through an infantry assault. Again, this is risky. I don't like doing it, but if you're into that sort of thing, and particularly if you're playing the Russians, they're good at this kind of thing, then it's certainly something worth pursuing. It is also possible to conduct an infiltration versus an armoured vehicle. However, the rules for that are very slightly different. So let's say there were no German infantry there, but there was an armoured vehicle. Now, getting close to it, especially if you have no anti-tank weapons for ranged combat, is a great way of trying to take the thing out. But when you draw your random position check, you have to pay attention to the different states. So if it's an open-topped vehicle, you would use the 5 column. The little O there is open-topped as a reminder, which this is as a half track. So normally the good sergeant would be starting there before applying the usual modifiers. However, if it was pinned, that is an entirely different matter, because you then get the beneficial modifier. And of course, if a tank, a heavy armoured vehicle, is buttoned up with limited visibility through the vision slits, you go for the B for buttoned up. So when it comes to infiltrating against armoured vehicles, the state of the armoured vehicle is very, very important. But otherwise, in essence, the rules for infiltration are the same. So there we go. That is infiltration in a nutshell. I am just going to add the terrain you're starting from is very important. You cannot infiltrate an enemy position from a minefield, or if your group happens to have a wire card placed on it. Obstacles of that nature are not something you can infiltrate from. Also, if you're hoping to infiltrate from a marsh, you can only do so if your group has already played some movement cards on it to permit exit from the marsh card. However, you can infiltrate a group that is in unfavourable terrain or that has had a wire card played on it. So that would be a no-no for the Russians infiltrating, but there would be no reason why they could not attempt to infiltrate that position. So I hope that's been useful in explaining the basics of infiltration. As I say, it's tricky because there are so many variables to remember in terms of the modifiers, and I personally never play without having a cheat sheet nearby, just so that, if I do end up in a situation where infiltration is desired, I can at least make sure that I don't miss anything, because a little checklist is so much handier than flipping through the rule book. What I would recommend is, if you're unfamiliar with infiltration and would like to give it a go, maybe before playing it in a scenario, set up something like this and just work through the different situations, different terrain types. Practice makes perfect, and before you know it, even if, like me, you're fairly reluctant to get too close to the enemy, especially when you can shoot him from a slightly safer distance, you'll at least be fairly comfortable with how it works. But I hope that this has been useful to those of you who've been interested in knowing how infiltration works. In the next video, I am going to be looking at the benefits of infiltration in more detail. I won't look at the doubling of firepower too much because that is fairly self-explanatory, but close combat, both against enemy troops and against vehicles, requires a fair bit of explanation because, like infiltration itself, it's a fairly involved process. But that's something for the next video. Again, I hope this has been useful to you, and I hope you found this enjoyable. To all of you who've joined me before and are joining me again, a huge thank you. Your company is always appreciated. And to anyone who might be joining the channel for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. I hope I'll see you again. Please do check out some of the other videos, and I hope you find them enjoyable and useful. In any case, thank you very much for tuning in. Bye.